I call to order this meeting of the Oversight Committee of the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. It is 10 a.m. Will the Board Secretary please take attendance of the Oversight Committee?
Mr. Montgomery.
Here.
Mr. Montgomery.
Here.
You say here. He's supposed to. No, okay. Mr.
I've got to get control of this meeting.
Yes.
Dr. Rice.
Here.
Dr. Rosenfeld.
Here.
Dr. Cumming.
Here.
CPRIT staff has informed me that Mr. Angelou will not be here today because of unavoidable conflicts. We have a quorum. Members, is there a motion?
To approve the excused absence of Mr. Angelou.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Members, the draft minutes for the February 21st Oversight Committee meeting are available in your agenda behind tab 1. Are there corrections or emendations or excisions to the minutes? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 21st Oversight Committee meeting.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Our next agenda item is public comment. Public feedback is critically important because CPRIT was created to help Texans. Opening our meetings with public comment underscores this board's commitment to transparency and accountability. Are there any requests for public comment? We have none. So we will move on to the next item, which is the Chief Executive Officer's report. The chair recognizes Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. First, I would like to again thank Higher Education Commissioner Raymond Paredes for allowing us use of his fine facilities. Not sure we will meet here again before the time of his retirement occurs, but of course wish him the very best in his retirement. With respect to personnel, we are fully staffed at this point in time. Can you hear me? My microphone is on. We are fully staffed at this point in time. At the end of May, though, we will have a changing of the guard in prevention. Ramona Magid will be the new Chief Prevention Officer at that point. And Dr. Garcia, as you know, will be retiring. In addition to that, I'd like to introduce, we've got two IT individuals here, Tyler Wisdom, Byron Oliver. If you stand up or wave your hand. These are new additions to the staff since you folks met. The next thing I'd like to cover is on page 2-5 in your books, the grant funds available. If you approve the recommendations before you today, we will have $141.5 million available going into the August meeting. So we have sufficient funds available to cover your actions today. Now I'd like to turn for a minute to the legislative action. And I am pleased to report all three of our legislative priorities have passed. House Bill 39 and House Bill 2507 have been sent to the governor for his signature, and HJR 12 to the Secretary of State. HJRs do not have to go to the governor. We expect our budget decisions to be released soon, probably this week. The success of this legislative session is gratifying. For several years, whenever asked about a CPRIT 2 by a reporter or others, I've responded that a CPRIT 2 would be a legislative decision based on their priorities and how well we've met their expectations since 2007. My goal was to make sure that CPRIT was worthy of this discussion. Last Friday, we received their judgment. Passage of HJR 12 only occurred because each of us did our part. The Oversight Committee established inspired, Texas-centric priorities that distinguish CPRIT from other cancer funding organizations. Our three programs released RFAs with valuable insight from advisory committees comprised of eminent individuals that you will hear from 3 of them later today. These RFAs resulted in high-quality responses that were rigorously prioritized by the finest peer review process in America, probably the world. Teams of our grant accountants and compliance specialists ensured the ongoing integrity of our awards. Inexhaustible IT, financial accounting, HR, and operations specialists glued it together to keep our processes running day and night. Legal assured that we adhered not only to the letter, but also to the spirit of state transparency requirements and the multitude of statutory and administrative rules that apply to us. Communications strategically and diplomatically narrated our accomplishments through the media and information material easily digested by state policymakers. The advocate community, too many to identify now, were awesome in their effectiveness and inspirational in their passion. And finally, our legislative champions, Senator Nelson, Chairman Zerwas, Senator Watson, Chair Sarah Davis, did the magic only they could do in their respective chambers, and did so with tenacity and determination. All made Friday possible. It's only right to pause and enjoy this recognition, but only briefly. November 5th is 174 days away. With that, Mr. Montgomery, my presentation concludes.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I would also, on behalf of the Oversight Committee, like to recognize the staff, legislators, and advocates for their efforts to assist the legislatures in this effort. I would also note that the effort to create CPRIT was itself a monumental achievement, but the achievement that may go somewhat unnoticed, for understandable reasons, is the keeping CPRIT alive in 2011, 12, and 13. That was a historic event, I would say, of equal proportion to the recent legislation, because it took this staff, many of whom were here, some of whom are gone, but many of you dedicated to the effort to preserve the institution in spite of long odds and terrible, terrible PR. So on behalf of the Oversight Committee, I want to thank those involved, but particularly the staff on this accomplishment. Thank you. Very well done. Are there any questions for Mr. Roberts? I believe we go to the most exciting part of the meeting, the Chief Compliance Officer report. As I'm fond of saying, compliance doesn't matter until it does. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. You'll find the compliance program update behind tab 3 in your book. And it is always a pleasure to be here. Thank you. It's been a productive quarter for the compliance group. I just want to give a shout out to the compliance staff. They're great folks to work with. They are a diligent and committed group of people, and I'm very honored to work with them and give them lots of kudos for all the work they do. The compliance program update highlights a majority of our activities, and yet we're always pulled different ways, whether it be for investigations or kind of one-off situations with grantees. But as an overview, you'll find a majority of our activities in front of you. I do want to highlight just a few things. As you may recall, back in February, I mentioned that we were piloting an enhanced desk review process. And the exciting thing for us about this is you kind of get into this bucket. If we've gone out to your facility, your organization, and we had a finding, and then the next year we went out and you had the same finding, then we think, well, maybe you didn't address the finding to begin with. And so you kind of get into this enhanced desk review bucket. We're piloting it with one grantee right now. We've had some success with that. And we're looking forward to kind of rolling that out in the future. So it's sort of a desk review on steroids or a low-calorie on-site review, however you want to look at that. But The other thing I wanted to bring up is, you may recall as well, back in February, we mentioned that we were going to split our grantee trainings. We're having one for all grantees, and then we broke them down by program in March, and it was very successful, received a lot of positive comments and feedback from grantees. So we're able to drill down to specific issues per grant type. For instance, if you were a prevention grantee, you had to sit through the whole matching, certification piece before, but now we can kind of cut that out because you don't have to have a match requirement. So those went really well. We have another set coming up in June 5 and 6, and we had about 175 grantee staff attend the first series, and we were just excited about that opportunity to use their time more efficiently and ours as well. And then on page 3-4, you'll find the delinquent report chart that I periodically show you. We're doing quite well overall. We did have a blip there in January. And again, to remind you, we looked into that, and it was the result of one of our grantees that has well over 100 grants, had some staffing issues, and some things fell through the cracks on that. And so there were several late reports. But we do have an ongoing call every other week with that grantee, and they have addressed that deficiency, as you can tell by the subsequent months there. And so we're back on track. I think the most recent delinquent report that I received this week maybe had 3 missing or delinquent reports in it. So we're back down to where we really want to be. So those are the main things I wanted to highlight, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, I have a question. If you have your enhanced desk review is simultaneously on steroids and low calorie, are you building compliance muscle mass?
Can't you tell? Yeah. Hopefully.
Members, any question for Mr. Burgess? Then I believe, Mr. Burgess, you will provide the compliance certification report for the proposed academic research awards.
Yes, sir. Thank you. In your proposed grant award booklet, so it's a separate booklet you have, on page 33, you'll find my compliance certification memo. And that memo is dated May 1st, and that was made available to you in the portal. The compliance certification outlines each step in the application award process, beginning with the approval of the RFA by the program officer all the way through the program integration committee. There were just a few awards this time, so the compliance certification went a little faster. I also attended the PIC meeting, as an observer, and I confirmed that process complied with CPRIT's administrative rules and applicable laws. As part of the compliance certification, I consult with CPRIT staff, GDIT staff, that's our third-party grants administrator. We review several pieces of documentation, and I think at the February meeting, I provided for you some templates of those. The attendance sheet, third-party observer report, our post-review statements. There's quite a few documents that we review, and many eyes look at those forms. So, but in review of that documentation, consultation with CPRIT staff, I'm confident that the application review process followed agency administrative rules and applicable laws, and I certify these award recommendations for your consideration today.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Any questions? Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Burgess. Chair recognizes Dr. Wilson to provide the Chief Scientific Officer's report and introduce the Program Integration Committee's grant award recommendations.
I have 2 action items for the committee. The first is the introduction of the PIC award recommendations for the past quarter. These are in response to 3 RFAs for recruitment, the established investigator, the rising star, and the first-time tenure track investigators. And the details begin on page 8 of the proposed grant award supplement. As has been the history of our recruitment awards, the committee received, the Scientific Review Committee received a substantial number during the past quarter. In fact, 23 applications were reviewed, and today we're bringing pick recommendations for 10 of these. It's a highly competitive, and as you'll see, the recommended grants really do bring to Texas, or promise to bring to Texas, some exceptional talent. To begin with, on page 10 are the 2 Established Investigator Award nominations that are being recommended. The first is to UT Southwestern for the recruitment of Suzanne Konzen. Suzanne Konzen's a physician scientist who's currently at the University of Chicago, where she is a professor of medicine and a program leader in their cancer center. Her research area is in the area of glucocorticoid research and therapeutic targeting, important in prostate, breast, and ovarian cancer therapy. And she has a long history of NIH-supported research, but also a history of strong mentorship. And her role at UT Southwestern will be to lead the Division of Hematology Oncology there. The second is to Baylor College of Medicine to enable the recruitment of Yang Li, a cancer scientist who's currently at the Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Li studies the interaction between our inherited genetic makeup and sensitivity to environmental toxins. This important area of research has been launched at Baylor College of Medicine under the leadership of Cheryl Walker. You'll remember Dr. Walker was a past chair of the University Advisory Committee, and his recruitment is a significant recruitment to her new program at Baylor. Moving on, I want to present the Rising Star nominations. The first is to UT Southwestern for the recruitment of King Zhang, a cancer scientist who's currently at the University of North Carolina. It studies the role of cell stress and response to low oxygen tension in the tumor area. This is an important area for tumors such as kidney cancer, and his recruitment is thought to be quite significant in terms of interactions that are potential with the kidney cancer program that you've heard about in the past from UT Southwestern. The second Rising Star Award is to MD Anderson to recruit Christina Conright. Dr. Conright is a kinesiologist, clinical investigator, who is leading nationally recognized clinical trials in understanding the role of exercise, both as in the survivorship impact following a diagnosis of breast cancer, as well as in the area of preventing cancers that are potentially impacted on by energetics. I want to mention that this is a particularly important recruitment from the standpoint of our Scientific Review Council, recognizing that a clinical investigator with the capabilities that she brings is a phenotype that's quite welcome by in response to our recruitment RFAs. And we have not had many clinical investigators nominated, but it gives us an opportunity to actually let the research community in Texas know that this is a phenotype that we're quite interested in. The bar is high. They need to be demonstrating exceptional potential, such as Dr. Conright, but I think this is a very nice example that hopefully will stimulate further recruitments in this area.
If I may, Dr. Wilson, you said she's involved in a number of clinical trials now. Do those follow her?
They do. Her trials are nationally based, and so she will continue. But importantly, actually the raison d'etre and exciting part of her recruitment is that her role in actually programs that are going to be populated by significant patient resources at MD Anderson, and I think that's going to have a big impact in Texas. I want to move on to tell you briefly about 6 first-time tenure-track recruitments. These are new faculty recruitments. The first 2, I'll tell you in pair because they represent nominations by the UT Southwestern. First to Samuel McBriar, a cancer scientist currently at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And the second is Chencheng Jin, a cancer scientist currently at Massachusetts or MIT. Both are being recruited to Dr. Sean Morrison's program at UT Southwestern, and you'll see the enthusiasm that both registered from our review team as being really the stars of the current recruitment class nationally. And again, testament to Dr. Morrison's ability to attract such extraordinary talent to Dallas and Texas. The next 3 on page 14 and 15 are recruitment awards to Rice University. And again, I'll talk about these as a group because there's a theme here. The first is Dr. Yang Gao, who is a biomedical engineer, structural biologist, who's currently at the National Institutes of Health. The second is Zhizheng Gao, who was a engineer who develops circuitry for analyzing problems related to cell signaling. He's from Caltech. And the third is Kevin McHugh, another MIT recruit. The reason I mention these 3 together because this represents something that we've seen over the past several years from Rice, and that is the ability to attract engineering and chemical expertise, but all 3 of these applications demonstrated quite significant potential for interaction across the Texas Medical Center, already establishing potential important collaborations between Rice, Baylor, UT Health, and MD Anderson. And then finally, a first-time tenure-track recruitment to Baylor College of Medicine, Anthony Musto, a cancer scientist who's currently at University of North Carolina that studies RNA metabolism and the important role that RNA alterations have in the development of cancers. So again, an exciting group of 10 potentially new individuals with great talent coming to Texas.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I understand that I am the only Oversight Committee member who reported conflicts of interest with the proposed awards. Are there any conflicts that members have not reported? Hearing none, members, you have the list of applications and grant amounts recommended by the PIC for the Academic Research Grant Awards. The PIC's recommendation will be approved if 2/3 of the Oversight Committee members present and able to vote approve the PIC's funding recommendations. Dr. Wilson presented 3 academic research award slates. Rather than taking a separate vote on the different grant mechanisms constituting 10 grant recommendations, I will ask for a vote to approve all the slates. If a member wants to consider one or more award recommendations individually, please make a motion to do so now. Since I have conflicts with the proposed awards, I ask Vice Presiding Officer D. Margo to call for a vote on consideration of the award recommendations. Mayor Margo.
I will entertain a motion to approve the PIC's recommendations for the following academic research grant award mechanisms: recruitment of first-time tenure-track faculty members, recruitment of rising stars, and recruitment of established investigators.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Hearing approval from at least 2/3 of the members present and able to vote, the motion carries. I note for the record that Mr. Montgomery did not vote on the award recommendations.
Still you.
Continuing.
Still you.
I will entertain a motion delegating contract negotiation authority to the CEO and CPRIT staff and to authorize the CEO to sign the contracts on behalf of CPRIT.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Right. Thank you, Mayor Margot, I will entertain a motion,
Well-
sorry,
Want him to present the rest of his.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Dr. Wilson.
Just have him present his update.
Yes, Dr. Wilson, the update of the Chief Scientific Officer report, excuse me.
So the second action item today is on page 4-13, and it actually continues the discussion of recruitment RFAs. We're proposing continuation for FY20 of the recruitment scholar RFAs for first-time tenure-track faculty members, for Rising Star, and for recruitment of established investigators. These are summarized again on page 4-13.
Members, any questions about the proposed slate of RFAs? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion approving the FY 2020 request for applications for recruitment awards. So moved. All in favor?
All right.
Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And now we have the sad pleasure of hearing from Dr. Garcia. Once again, and for the last time, Chair recognizes Dr. Garcia to provide the Chief Prevention and Communication Officer's report.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with the communications report under tab 5. So I think you'll see that in the last quarter, we've had quite a bit of media coverage. And this is because of a combination of the legislative actions on CPRIT and, of course, the awards in February. We always have a spike in media coverage. But, of course, the biggest news came on Friday with the legislative action on CPRIT bills. And I hope you saw those articles in e-news. If not, we can send those to you again. They, of course, didn't make it into your packet. They just came out early this week. Also of note in the media coverage were 2 articles with a national distribution. And we're quite happy to get some national visibility. The Cancer Letter and Politico are both have national distribution. And again, the Politico one didn't make it into your packet because it was came out a little bit later. So we've outlined other activities in the memo for you to see what we've been working on in the last 4 to 6 weeks. But I just wanted to take a step here and say that I think you will have seen that in the last few years, the communication team's activities have really evolved and have really substantially increased as the communication needs of the agency have changed. We've really had an increased effort to showcase CPRIT's work and tell our stories through more interviews and video production, a real increase in social media efforts. And Chris Catrone, in particular, has worked very hard with our grantee institutions to help collaborate with them to tell their stories and to put on events such as the press conference that was held in El Paso and the mayor's proclamation in Houston last May. So really seeing an increase in collaboration with the institutions that I think is very good. And now we have a new website with a digital newsroom. So that's really going to allow the agency the effort to really showcase more of our work. We've also started to track some of the metrics. You'll find those at the bottom of the memo on page 3 to see how we're doing. Just a few metrics. And it's really too early to see any trends with these. It's just a few months starting in January when we had the new website released. But over time, we ought to be able to see what's happening and to track our progress and see where we need to increase our efforts. So, as you know, communications is really going to be even busier in the next 6 months, as telling our story is going to be very important as we approach November. And we've already started thinking about that. We've been talking with our communications firm about an educational outreach strategy. And we started talking about that a few weeks ago. Tomorrow, we're going to meet with Wayne and Kristen and present some preliminary ideas. So you'll be hearing more about that, I'm sure. The last thing on the communications update is an update on the conference. Staff is proposing that we use the Austin Convention Center and the Fairmont Austin Hotel in downtown Austin as the venues for 2020. The dates are July 30 and 31. And I'm happy to announce that Heidi has volunteered to take on this effort. So she will be managing all of the issues and agenda and conference items going forward. And a little bit later today, she's going to present a contract for food and beverage that you will need to look at and consider.
Do we express congratulations or condolences?
I don't know what she was thinking, but she volunteered. And we'll send out a save the date after the Oversight Committee takes action after this meeting. So,
If I could add here, we are very pleased to report that Dr. Jim Allison will be our keynote address at that meeting.
so that concludes my communications report. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Becky. Does CPRIT put out active press releases?
We do. We absolutely do, especially after we'll be sending one out probably as we speak on the awards that were made today.
Does that go out to like a national press service like Cision or one of those?
I don't know how much national media is on that. We definitely hit all of the Texas media, and our communication firm has that list and sends that out. We can definitely get a copy for you if you'd like to see that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Garcia on communications? Dr. Garcia, if you would go ahead with prevention.
Will do. So I have a memo with an update about the next two cycles in your book, and that starts on 5-42. But what I'd like to do for my final report is give you an overview of the program, a little bit about where we started, and an update on the program to date. So I think I've got some slides.
See if you do better than I did.
So I think you know back in 2007, the prevention program was not part of CPRIT when it was being considered at the legislature, but the advocates fought really hard to include prevention. And so the compromise then was to carve out 10% for prevention. And we're really glad that they did, because today I think it is a key part of the agency's success story. And more importantly, as these statistics will show you, I think CPRIT can take some credit, some part in contributing to the health and well-being of Texans and in the overall decrease in mortality rates in the state.
On that slide, the 912,000 survivors, is that in Texas?
In Texas, yes. So it was really exciting for me back in 2009. and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be able to build a program from scratch, to build a new prevention program for the state. So I really had a blank slate to work with. I knew what the advocates had been proposing. There was an early advisory council that had some ideas of what the prevention program should be. But I started by calling public health experts across the country, people I knew, and asking for their advice, asking for ideas, and also recruiting some chairs and reviewers. But I quickly found out that there really wasn't a statewide model that I could just follow, that I could copy, and really not to accomplish the kinds of things that I thought were needed in the state. So we started by identifying the principles and priorities, what we would do and what we wouldn't do with this program. And one of the first decisions was we decided we were not going to fund prevention research out of the 10%, that prevention research could be funded, but out of the 90% for research. And that was a negotiation with the Chief Scientific Officer at the time, but we got that done. And so we really set out these priorities and principles, some of which you endorsed and formalized through your annual priorities process. But we knew that we wanted to prioritize populations and geographic areas of the state that were disproportionately affected by cancer. We wanted the program to be evidence-based. We didn't want proposals that weren't research tested. We wanted to make sure that the interventions proposed would work. We wanted it to be results-oriented, especially in the beginning. We knew that it was going to be important to have a measurable public health impact, something we could measure, something we could report to the legislature. I didn't want people telling me, well, I had 150 people sit in an education session. That just wasn't going to cut it. I wanted to know what was the outcome of that. Did they go get screening? How many went and got screened? So it was very results-oriented. And we also wanted to build capacity in the state to promote innovation, to promote best practices, but also to train a cadre of healthcare workers. So we have adhered to these principles over the 10 years, and as I said, you reviewed and formalized those priorities. I'd also mention that in our RFAs, there are other things that we thought were very important for this program, and we really emphasize them in our requests for applications. Access to treatment is one. We didn't want people, grantees, detecting cancer, especially for the under and uninsured, and then leaving them with no resources. They had to tell us how they were going to help people get treatment and how they were going to navigate them to treatment. We wanted them to consider systems improvement. How were they going to improve the systems they were working within? Wanted them to think about sustainability beyond CPRIT funding, and of course disseminating their work throughout the state and their lessons learned and best practices. And so we knew we were asking a lot in these RFAs, but we also felt that the level of the awards was such that they could deliver on these expectations, and they have. And I think you'll see that. So fast forward to 10 years to today, and here's some of the results and the impact of the program. You'll be familiar with this map. You've seen it before. We've awarded 216 grants totaling over $235 million, and as you know, our grantees have been able to reach residents from every county in the state with prevention services. This slide just shows you the type of project that's been funded since the program's inception. You can see the bottom bar, the majority have been for screening and diagnostics, followed by cancer prevention vaccinations. Then survivor care, tobacco cessation, and healthy living make up the next group, followed by a few genetic testing grants. And there's going to be some overlap in these numbers. And this other slide shows the number of projects by cancer type, and again, overlap in these numbers. And not surprising, the largest types of cancers are those that have screening tests. And we've just recently started supporting lung cancer screening and emphasizing interest in liver cancer prevention, so those numbers are a little bit smaller right now. So what do we have to show for the last 10 years? When I was first thinking about this program, I just really couldn't imagine where it would take us. But thanks to the creativity, the passion, the hard work of our grantees, we can say we are providing hope and life-saving services to Texans from every county. Over 5.4 million services so far, half in education and training and half in clinical services. And our current RFAs require both the delivery of education and clinical services. We weren't that way in the beginning, some of the early RFAs, but we have moved to require the delivery of both. And you know that the program is a lot more than just a screening program, but if we just look at the results of our screening services, we've screened over 363,000 people who've never had a screening and detected almost 20,000 cancer precursors and cancers. But in addition to providing just these evidence-based services, one of the early principles we had was that we wanted people to exceed their current performance in a given service area. So with these additional grant funds, if they were already providing breast cancer screening, what were these funds going to allow them to do to exceed what they were currently doing? So we asked them to set a baseline in their RFAs, in their applications for what they're currently doing, and set targets for what they're going to do with these funds, the increase over their baseline. And we also expected them to improve the healthcare system. And these are some examples of how they're doing that, what they're doing to improve the healthcare system, like reducing wait times for diagnostic testing, reducing the number of people that are lost to follow-up, implementing patient reminders, enhancing their medical records. And there's also some other changes that are happening that are a bit harder to measure. For example, in this box, one of the grantees talks about a culture shift within their system, within their care delivery, and he attributes it to the impact of CPRIT grants. We also emphasized the need for innovation in their RFAs. What were you going to do to challenge the status quo, to think about these issues a little bit differently? And their innovative thinking, the grantees' innovative thinking and creativity really surpassed my expectations. But, you know, I probably shouldn't be surprised. There are really some extraordinary researchers and practitioners in the state. And we see that others around the country are taking notice of what's happening in Texas. So our grantees have been invited to present before HHS, before NCI, before CDC, and even to testify before a U.S. congressional committee on the work that is being done in Texas. And we've talked some about the economic benefits of prevention. So in addition, the program's contributing to the economic health of Texans and to the state. And, there are real cost savings when you detect something early, when you prevent cancer, in treatment costs and direct health spending. But at the end of the day, it's all about helping people like Samantha. This is one of the patients who was served by Moncrief. She didn't have insurance. She found a lump and wouldn't go get a mammogram because they couldn't afford it. Her husband finally encouraged her when the lump got larger to go. She went to Moncrief Cancer Institute, and thankfully it was diagnosed at a stage where treatment could be effective. And she credits CPRIT with giving her hope and saving her life. So thank you. I'm going to have a hard time now.
It's okay. This is one of the few places in the world where it's not only acceptable, but encouraged to cry.
But I can't talk if I cry.
No, that's okay. I'll take over. I think.
I just want to thank you all for your support and your trust in me. It has really been amazing. Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. I think one of the proudest accomplishments that CPRIT can mention is the map. I think the fact that we have gotten to all 254 counties with some services really is an extraordinary achievement. Because there's a lot of Texas and a lot of Texans. Dr. Garcia, we have a resolution, which I will now read, commending your service. The Oversight Committee of the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, also known as CPRIT, by unanimous vote of its members, adopts the following. Following resolution. Whereas Rebecca Garcia, PhD, has served as the Chief Prevention Officer of the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas from August 10th, 2009, and as the Chief Prevention and Communications Officer from January 1, 2014 to May 31, 2019. And whereas Dr. Garcia continued her exemplary career dedicated to advancing healthcare when she joined CPRIT as the founding Chief Prevention Officer. And whereas Dr. Garcia created and implemented CPRIT's innovative and recognized cancer prevention programs to serve all Texans, especially the most vulnerable, underserved citizens of Texas. And whereas Dr. Garcia transformed CPRIT's communications initiative by assuming the role of Chief Communications Officer. And whereas Dr. Garcia spearheaded multiple CPRIT innovations in cancer prevention and research conferences to showcase CPRIT's advances in the fight against cancer. And whereas Dr. Garcia worked selflessly for and on behalf of CPRIT, giving her time, reputation, wisdom, expertise, and energy. And whereas Dr. Garcia steadfastly performed the duties of her position with equanimity, persistence, poise. And whereas Dr. Garcia earned the respect and admiration of the Oversight Committee, her CPRIT colleagues, and the greater cancer prevention and control community through her leadership of both CPRIT's prevention and communications programs. And whereas CPRIT's mission of promoting prevention, academic research, and product development research advanced under Dr. Garcia's guidance and leadership to the benefit of all Texans. Now, therefore, it is resolved that the Oversight Committee of CPRIT hereby recognizes Dr. Becky Garcia for her distinguished service to the citizens of the state of Texas and expresses its gratitude for her many and lasting contributions to CPRIT. And be it further resolved that an official copy of this resolution be prepared for Dr. Garcia as an expression of high regard by Oversight Committee's members and CPRIT staff. And I happen to have that right here.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion to approve the resolution that I just read.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Dr. Garcia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Turn it
It's
around,
upside
turn
down.
it around.
Distress signal.
Hey, Chris, get a picture with her up here in the center, and we're
Wait, wait,
behind.
I have one last slide.
Oh.
That's what my future journeys will look like. You can't see him, but that's my husband in the river trout fishing.
Becky, come up here so we can get a picture of everyone.
Y'all want to snuggle in?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but we'll move in closer, but I don't know.
Off the
No,
record.
but you ought to be in front holding it.
No, no.
You're in front holding it in front of us.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Becky, for getting all this squared away. This is perfect.
Oh, I know. Mr. Montgomery, I too would like to say a few words.
Microphone.
Good.
This is hard for me too, Becky. There are three legs to our stool: prevention, academic research, and product development research. And I expect our chiefs to all advocate for their programs as strongly as they possibly can. Without doubt, Becky has advocated for prevention harder than any of the others, even though she has the least amount of money to spend. But the word persistence is in that resolution for a reason. Becky is tenacious and persistent without a doubt. And it did not hurt her advocacy one bit to also be the Chief Communications Officer, so that every time something came to me promoting CPRIT, it always led off with prevention, even though it just had 10% of the money. I'll sort of close by saying that over the past, whatever it is, 7 years now, golly gee, I probably have learned more about management thanks to Becky Garcia than anybody else. The governor also extends his congratulations.
Thank you very much. And before I break down, I wanted to commend my team. I'm very pleased that Ramona will succeed me as Chief Prevention Officer. She has been with me from the beginning. I hired her about 6 months after I came on board. And Chris Catrone and Spencer Miller-Payne in the communications effort have just been outstanding. So wanted to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops. Get me out of there.
Yeah, got it. I believe next we have Dr. Cindy Walker-Peach. Dr. Walker-Peach, could I just ask you, we're trying to juggle a few agenda items. Do you know how long you will be?
10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes.
I think 10 minutes would be great if you can do it. I don't want to cut you short because we could put someone else here, but if you can do it in 10, that would be terrific. Thank you.
As one CPRIT journey ends, the next begins. So, good morning, all. Thank you for welcoming me to CPRIT. This is my first Oversight Committee meeting, and thank you all for being so hospitable. I'm very happy to be here. So for your consideration today, and you will find this under tab 6, is my report broken into 3 separate sections. One on an update of the grant award mechanisms that are ongoing, one on the Product Development Advisory Committee update and status, which we'll hear more about later in the agenda, and the third is the Product Development Research Council composition that is changing a little bit. So let me begin with an update of the current and ongoing product development peer review award cycles that are ongoing. I will start with 19.1. As you may recall from the Oversight Committee in February of this year, there were 2 applicants that were in an extended diligence phase. By extended diligence, what that means, there are 2 applicants that the PDRC voted to take no action on until there was further information collected from the applicants. Subsequently, one of the applicants provided the requested information and data. The PDRC reviewed the provided materials and voted to decline the applicant from further consideration. The second no-action applicant remains pending further collection of additional information from the applicant. Once the requested materials are obtained and reviewed by the PDRC may opt to recommend the applicant for a PIC and Oversight Committee consideration. If that were to happen, we anticipate bringing that to this group in the August Oversight meeting. So that concludes 19.1 cycle. 19.2, CPRIT released 3 RFAs in December of 2018 for the 19.2 cycle. All 3 of the RFAs covered all 3 of the current product development mechanisms, grant award mechanisms. The 19.2 award mechanisms include the seed awards for startup companies, the relocation award mechanisms for early stage and established companies considering relocating to Texas, and the Texco award mechanisms for early stage and established companies that are already headquartered in the state of Texas. 27 applications were received by the closing date of January 30th of this year, and the aggregate funding request is $210.4 million. Peer review screening calls were held in March of this year, and 11 applicants were selected by the reviewers to present in person in Dallas on April 16th, 17th, and 18th of this year. After the in-person presentations, the reviewers selected 4 candidates to move forward into the diligence phase. The aggregate value of the funding requested by the 4 is $28.8 million. The cohort of 4 contains 1 Texas company applicant, 1 relo company applicant, and 2 seed company applicants. Currently, the cohort is in the intellectual property, technical, and business diligence phase. If any of these candidates are recommended by the PDRC in July of this year, they will move to the PIC and the Oversight for final consideration at the August Oversight meeting. That concludes 19.2. Moving to 20.1. You may recall in the February 2019 Oversight meeting approved the release of 3 product development grant award mechanisms, including the seed, relo, and Texas company award pathways. The application portal will open in June 27, 2019, and close on August 7th of this year. Any awards resulting from the 20.1 cycle are planned to be presented at the February 2020 Oversight Committee. So this concludes the award mechanisms update. I have 2 additional topics I'd like to cover. One is the Product Development Advisory Committee. As you may recall, that's an ad hoc advisory committee that offers guidance to the Oversight Committee on issues relating to product development. The PDAC, the Product Development Advisory Committee, also known as the PDAC, convened on April 11th of this year. And Dr. Jonathan McQuitty is the chair of the PDAC, will be giving his recommendations to this group in a later part of our agenda for today. The last topic that I have is the Product Development Review Council. The Review Council, of course, presides over the peer review process and critically reviews all critiques and makes final award recommendations to the PIC, and those, of course, come to the Oversight Committee. Regrettably, we've had a very strong PDRC, and we're losing one of our members due to personal reasons. Dr. Sandra Silberman has notified CPRIT that she will be stepping down at the end of May. Our chair, Jack Jeltosky, has recommended a new member join the PDRC. Her name is Kelly Bolton, and Kelly will be joining us on June 1st. So we'll have our full PDRC available. So this really it was a very fast overview this time. We don't have any awards this cycle, but this does conclude my report for this meeting, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Walker-Peach? Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Welcome officially to CPRIT, even though you've been here for a while. Members, we will take the next item somewhat out of order. I'd like to call in the Product Development Advisory Committee annual report from Dr. Jonathan McQuitty. Dr. McQuitty is here as a guest from California and would like to get home. So Dr. McQuitty, as exciting as these meetings are, he does. I'm sorry, Dr. Walker-Peach, would you like to introduce Dr. McQuitty? I apologize.
Salary position, as I like to point out. Can you hear me? No.
Is the,
Okay. A negative salary position, as I point out to people, pay my own way to come and talk to you. So I'd like to thank the Oversight Committee for the opportunity to give you an update from the Product Development Advisory Committee, which met recently, as we were just told. Is it possible to have the slides? Perfect, thank you. So two parts to what I'm going to say today. The first is to give you an update on the product development status, and then some recommendations from the advisory committee about how things might be done in the future, particularly thinking of the potential for the new $3 billion financial availability. So with respect to the previous $3 billion, there are ring-fence funds which are available for awards to be made in the cycles that you just heard about. This is sort of the application history, and I'd like to draw the attention of the Oversight Committee to the number of grants, applications that were submitted, and those that were funded, and the success rate associated with that. You will note, for example, in 2017, there was only one grant made. In 2018, 3 have been funded. I would say that if there's a single message that the Product Development Advisory Committee could make to the Oversight Committee, we regard this as a very unfortunate outcome. Occasionally, people make the assumption that if you fund research, if you build it, they will come. And I would say that is increasingly not the case. And that's just, by the way, not true just in Texas, but in other parts of the United States. I was at a drug symposium at Stanford University a few weeks ago, and the president of Stanford University, Mark Tessie-Levine, who has familiarity with the biotechnology world, having served in a company in that field, explained that even in the Bay Area, where of course there is an abundance of venture capital, it's increasingly difficult to actually fund the early stages of a therapeutic development program. I think this is a significant issue, and we have heard about the exemplary work in prevention, and of course with the awarding of a Nobel Prize, the quality of research in Texas, I think, is abundantly clear to everybody. I think the bit that's missing here is the support for early stage activities of a commercial nature. I gave the analogy the last time I was here to a sort of hi-fi system. You know, you have a great turntable and you have these great speakers, but you don't have an amplifier, and it's not going to work if you don't have an amplifier.
I don't know if you don't mind if we ask questions as you go.
Please.
Can you define for us early stage?
So it's the stage, what we would call preclinical development. So it's the kind of activities that would normally not take place in an academic environment, although I'd say increasingly there are academic institutions that feel that they need to move into that in order to actually allow their research to impact the real world. But it's where you are developing, where you are manufacturing larger quantities of an important compound, where you're doing sort of toxicology on that work, where you're redoing experiments to show that they're reproducible, where you're starting to put together some of the experimental work that you need in order to file for an IND. This is work that is, in most cases, not the kind of thing that you could publish in a scientific journal, okay? And as a consequence for that, it's not normally part of an academic investigator's interest to think about doing this kind of work. And so you have this gap here between where the academic institution ends their activities and where the sort of financial community might pick things up. And I would say that that chasm is grown wider over time. There are a number of venture capital firms, I'm thinking in one particular, where in order to get money from this venture capital firm, you would need to produce phase 2B data. They would like several hundred patients on your compound before they would make, quote, a venture capital investment, unquote. So you have, the financial markets increasingly focused on sort of being closer to the finish line and having a relatively short-term perspective on things. And so, and the cost of developing drugs these days has increased significantly over the last 10 years. And so you have this sort of gap opening up where the academic world understandably has little incentive to move into these activities, and there's relatively little financial capacity to fund that. And absent significant sort of funding support from institutions like CPRIT, many of these research developments, important though they are, may never see the light of day, may never actually be available to help cancer patients.
Thank you. And just to gild the lily there for clarity,
Yeah.
Those investments might be investments from what size to what size? I just want to hear you say it.
So preclinical, the cost of preclinical development is a few $1 million. It's not a huge amount of money. The cost of doing a phase 1 study, depends on the kind of compound, how difficult it is to manufacture, the complexity of the phase 1. But we're talking in, maybe $15 million, $20 million.
That's where we've been.
Yes. So I would say there are two distinct things there. One is sort of preclinical development, and then there's the early stage clinical development. And that gap, I think, right now is a major impediment to cancer therapies being available for patients.
Thank you.
Dr. Patel.
Thank you. Are the academic centers interested in moving into this space?
A great question, and I think the answer is increasingly they are interested in doing it. I think they're motivated for two reasons. One, I think many investigators would like their therapy to end up being used to treat patients, and they found that they're just not able to attract commercial funding, and so they've been looking for other ways to access funding to take their projects forward. And so I think academics have sort of moved into the vacuum, if you like, in the early stage. I would say that's helpful, but the skill set necessary to do that increasingly as you move down there is skill sets that don't normally exist inside academic institutions. You might be a great biologist, a cancer biologist, you might be able to develop some interesting compounds, but when you get into the area of doing toxicology, filing an IND, the kinds of things you need to do that are sort of suitable from a regulatory point of view are very tricky. I had a very skilled academic who thought he could move into this area and explained that he understood standard operating procedures, SOPs, things like that. And I asked him, do you have an SOP for forming SOPs? And then I think he realized that he was not really operating at the level that you need to in order to move into that field. So at some point in time here, it doesn't really suit an academic group to be in that. And I think in those cases, it is better to spin it out and attract the kind of expertise and skills you need to do it. But to do that, you have to put some money together. There are, I think, sources of capital in Texas. But I think that when they've faced the kinds of timelines and amounts of money necessary to get to the next stage, it is daunting for them. And I think that CPRIT can do an amazing job here, both in the early stages by providing small amounts of money, $3 million, that kind of thing. We talk about the seed program, for example, helping with that. But then the larger amounts of money, $15, $20 million, to get further into the clinical process, to get the signs of human efficacy, which are really what are going to bring in financial investors. When they see the risk has been reduced, the time to get to sort of definitive human efficacy data is reduced, then they're willing to engage. When you start at the beginning, the risk, the amount of money, and the time, it is daunting for a small financial organization to do.
Dr. McWitty, I have two questions. One is, suppose that we were able to increase the product development grants in the chasm that you're talking about.
Yes.
We have heard over and over that San Franciscans and Bostonians like to have their companies in their backyards. Would the capital come here?
I think that's an excellent question. I would say in San Francisco, as I just indicated, it's increasingly difficult to do that. Boston, interestingly, for a variety of reasons, is actually a much easier place, relatively easy, to fund early-stage development work. But I would say the Bay Area is increasingly less easy, and certainly Texas is less easy. I do think, though, that if you have the kinds of support that CPRIT is thinking of applying, that there are sources of capital within Texas and sources of capital outside Texas for whom that sort of additional horsepower would tip the balance and get them to be more interested in participating here.
So my second question is, on the chart that you have the overall success rate of
Yes.
9.5%.
Yes.
What meaning do you attribute to that number? In other words, is it high? Is it low? If it's high, is that good? If it's low, is that bad? And if it's low, what do you see as the reason for it being a low number?
Great question. So I think the number to focus on is 400 million, okay? So 400 million out of close to 3 billion. We're getting close to 3 billion. So that ratio strikes me as an incorrect ratio. The cost of developing cancer drugs is such that the cost of the research as a function of the total cost of the process, okay? The research is actually a small part of the total cost. The clinical costs, even the early stage clinical costs, that ratio strikes me as one where, you don't have enough shots on goal, okay? This will eventually get down to probabilities, okay? You need to have sufficient shots on goal, sufficient sort of companies that are moving into the clinic, that you have a probability that you're going to have them go through phase 2, go through phase 3, get approved. And if I had a worry here, if I was a member of the Oversight Committee, this would be my worry, that you will do a fair amount, $400 million, but it will be insufficient to capitalize on the research. You will end up with a lower number of shots on goal, and unless you are lucky, you will end up with a lower number of therapies.
Any,
Why don't we
I
let you
realize
get
you
your
haven't finished. We've interrupted
let's
you
let you
several
get your
times.
slides go.
No, this is the heart of my talk.
Do you have 10 more slides or 5 or 2, or why don't you
I've got
finish them if you
6.
can? Okay.
Don't worry, we're okay.
Okay, because we have more questions.
Go. If you have questions,
If you want,
please.
do you think of, one of the cornerstones of the research, academic research investments that we make,
Yes.
the grants that we make, is certainly the researchers we bring, we recruit in. And I
Yes.
think that's a cornerstone that has, implications
Yes.
for decades, all that. I wondered if, among the things that you think of, if we should be thinking about a recruitment program for people that can play those roles. Right now, we focus on medicines and trying to fund things as opposed to fund people. And I wonder if there's any kind of a thought about that you would have.
That's an interesting idea. I think,
like to commercialize drug X or Y, you kind of need some experienced guy who maybe comes from the West Coast, who's already done 3, biotech startups, and he's raised $100 million over 5 companies over 5 to 10 years. That's the guy you need to come match with a compound. So we focus on the compound, but really maybe what we need is that guy or gal. That's what I'm asking. If that's
a really interesting idea. I would have to say the Product Development Advisory Committee hadn't really thought about that. But I think in the same way that you're recruiting investigators who are very experienced to come here and to do their research, recruiting entrepreneurs here to come and do that, recruiting venture capitalists to come here who have experience in helping to establish those kinds of companies, fund those kinds of companies. I think that's an intriguing idea. I do. It's not one of my recommendations, but I like it.
Along those, I had a related question.
Yes.
But Bill's question was actually much better than mine. Could you envision a fund that has both CPRIT funds in it and venture funds to increase the pool of dollars, and that would then bring in venture people, experienced CEOs, so sort of a fund of funds, if you will?
What you're suggesting is an interesting idea, which is the idea of a sort of a venture capital fund where CPRIT might be the anchor tenant of that fund. And you raise $300 million, CPRIT puts out $100 million, and you have a dedicated fund which could help do it and which would have sort of commercial objectives, and that would help bring in the other $200 million. There is certainly a number of different organizations around the world. I can think of government organizations. The government of Ireland, for example, set up such a fund, and the other Quebec has set up such funds. So that could be done. I would say the issue for that, and it would be something that's sort of above my pay grade, the Oversight Committee and the legislature will have to think about this. By definition, it's a blind pool. Okay, you do not know what you're going to be investing in at the time that you make the initial grant. And so that raises additional issues and questions. I think that it's certainly something to think about. I think that the current idea of giving CPRIT grants to designated companies where there's a matching component, one thing you could do is to shift the matching so that the CPRIT was 2 to 1. You could change the ratio here to make it easier to get to reasonable numbers. But I think that a $20 million grant with, let's say, $10 million of sort of financially orientated money would give you a pool of $30 million, and that allows you to do quite a bit in this area.
Members, I have to ask everybody to keep their questions as brief as possible so that we can finish up, because we do have other people coming, but I don't want to inhibit the discussion, but we do have time constraints. Yes, Dr. Cummings, did you have a question? No?
I just had one more, and I'm sorry to do it. You may have this has come to us already, but like in the academic research where they have, I think, 7 subgroups for review committees. I know we've mentioned this, I can't remember where in the last month or so in conversation. Is there a role, do you think, for the review of product development grants to be in subgroups that maybe have focused specialization, whatever, as opposed to what we do now, which is have one group that reviews them all?
I don't think that's necessary. I think that they're all focused on oncology. I think that's fine. Jack Telkowski, who's the head of the Product Development Review Committee, I've known Jack in a professional capacity. I think the review process itself, I think is I'll come to some recommendations, but I don't think that's necessarily flawed. I think that we need to get more applications into the hopper and process those applications in a different way than we're doing today, and I have some recommendations as to how to do that.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Okay. Thank you for the discussion. There are plenty of places in Texas where product development awardees exist. The seed mechanism, which was introduced fairly recently, is the idea of having this smaller early stage funding up to $3 million to give a sort of a junior grant that would allow people to move to a senior grant once they had developed the information to do that. And as you can see, there have been quite a few seed applications received. I think that program is working well. Okay, recommendations. Improving the number of applications into the hopper. So there are a number of different recommendations here. One is to increase the visibility of CPRIT, both inside and outside Texas. I think that most technology transfer office TTOs are aware of CPRIT, but I think that more can be done to explain more particularly about the seed program, about the larger program, to help increase the number of applications. I think that would be helpful. And certainly with outside of Texas, for a variety of reasons, staff has not been able to travel to trade conferences and other kinds of cancer-based conferences where they could make the people aware of CPRIT, and that might lead to companies relocating here or starting here.
What makes you say that within Texas, TTOs are not aware of?
Well, I think that the level of understanding of CPRIT and the need for applications, I think that there is some more that could be done there. I think that there's some awareness of it, but I think we could be more aggressive about pulling applications into the process. I think we need to be more aggressive about that.
Dr. Rosenfeld?
Yep.
Just to maybe focus one of your statements on...
Dr. Rosenfeld, turn on your microphone and speak into it, please.
Just to focus the statement on visibility.
Yes.
Keep trying. No.
Just to say, so what are you recommending that, for instance, that CPRIT would have a commercial booth or something at ASCO
Yes.
or ASH?
ASCO, ASH, AACR, yes. And the bio meeting where you could have a booth there. You would get traffic from people who aren't aware of it. I would say the details here remain to be worked out. I think staff understands what the issue here. The idea here is just to increase the number of applications, okay? And both from inside and outside Texas. There should be some effort towards that.
Very good. I think there's been reluctance to have a presence at ASCO at ASH, or maybe there may be a legislative or administrative reason why not to.
I think there were cost concerns about doing it, and I understand those cost concerns, but I think given the importance of increasing the number of applications into the funnel, we have to address this.
Thank you.
Continue, please.
Yes. So improving the review process. And I would say there are several things here. One important one, a number of people on the committee felt that many times applicants were not aware of the reasons why they were unsuccessful. And if they were more aware, it would help them do a better job in resubmitting an application which addressed some of the concerns. So access to the lead reviewer to understand what the concerns were. The third point here is that right now we have a sort of binary situation, particularly in these large grants. You either get something or you get nothing. And we don't have a mechanism here to help people bring in particularly the commercial expertise or the patent expertise or the regulatory expertise to make certain their application is sort of stronger, okay? And so floated the idea with staff of being able to give a junior grant, particularly with the interesting research, where $100,000 or $200,000 is approved to allow them to go back and hire the expertise that they need to do to bolster their application. In many cases, I think the review committee felt that the science was very interesting, but the application was just didn't warrant making an award. And I think if we can strengthen those applications, that will be helpful. The last point is, providing a list of consultants. I don't necessarily need to be in Texas, but it'd be helpful if they were, who could provide such an expertise to an academic group that's thinking of spinning out. They're just not aware. And I think having a list of sort of qualified people that the CPRIT staff felt were, providing quality work so that they would have people to refer to. Here is a patent firm who can help you think about your IP strategy. Here is a regulatory firm or regulatory individual who could help you think about your regulatory strategy. And then the point about staggering the awards, so that if you applied for a $10 million grant and were not successful and told you were too early, that you wouldn't have to wait 12 months in order to be able to apply for a seed, so that we time those things so that feedback might be to an applicant, you haven't got your act together sufficiently for us to give you a big grant, but we're intrigued, and you may want to apply to the seed program, and that's 2 months from now, okay? So that allows them not to lose time in that process. This, to some extent, CPRIT is already doing, which is the idea of making second or third awards to people who already have original awards. It seems self-evident to the Product Development Advisory Committee that if you have a team that's high caliber, it would make a lot of sense to give them additional grants for other projects. I think that's... This is kind of, we talked about this. I think the Product Development Committee feels very strongly that there needs to be an increased amount of investment in product development. And to do that, we need to increase the number of applications that are available, increase the quality of those applications, structure this in ways where the applicants can get feedback or small amounts of money to make certain that are of quality that CPRIT can fund. We did talk about, sorry.
Going back to your previous slide.
Yes.
Point 1 talks about substantially increasing CPRIT's investment in product development.
Yes.
I think that percentage of the total funds stands somewhere about 20% now, and has been at that 20% for,
yes,
for a prolonged period.
Yes.
Speaking for PDEC,
yes,
what would you recommend that funding percentage to be?
Higher than 20%. I just feel that the question was asked originally, $400 million. Okay, I worry greatly that CPRIT has three objectives. Prevention, supporting research. Check both those boxes, and then the last is product development. For two reasons. One, to provide therapies which might help mitigate or indeed cure cancer for the citizens of Texas, but also to help develop an ecosystem here which might be economically valuable. And on that one, I think the Product Development Committee feels very strongly that ecosystem doesn't exist, and we're not getting enough shots on goal to provide the benefit that CPRIT would like to get. There was discussion about, could we expand the applications by accepting applications from public companies? And there was I would say not unanimity on that. I think some people felt that, once you're a public company, the chances are you have access to commercial sources of capital, and it's sort of, CPRIT should be sort of hoarding the money for the earlier stage process. At the same time, there's no question that if you accept applications from public company, you would increase the number of applications. So there was a debate about that and no clear consensus on it. The idea of allowing applications from nonprofit institutes who might want to get a seed award to do early stage development before they subsequently spun it out as a commercial entity. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm at the Product Development Advisory Committee for doing that. And then what constitutes a Texas company? There was an elaborate discussion of what constitutes a Texas company. How Texas should it be to be Texas and Texan? And I think the feeling of the Product Development Advisory Committee was that was way above our pay grade. We dare not think about what it means to be Texan, so we didn't address that.
Probably wasn't a pair of boots in the room.
There's more information about these recommendations under tab 11, so if you want to see some more detail about that. I would like to acknowledge the work of the other members of the Product Development Advisory Committee for their time and commitment to helping provide this feedback. And I'd like to close by thanking Wayne and other members of the staff. I've had the pleasure of working with them for 3 years now, and I would say their dedication and thoughtfulness is exemplary. I think that CPRIT and the state of Texas is fortunate to have individuals of this quality. Thank you.
Members, any other questions for Dr. McCritty? Dr. McCritty, thank you very much for your time. We greatly appreciate the time and effort. I've already asked this, and you said nothing, so go ahead. Go ahead. Dr. Russ.
As you know, I'd like to lurk on these subcommittee meetings that you guys have had, and I just wanted to say personally thank you very much for your leadership. And I hadn't realized that we don't compensate for maybe travel or whatnot, so I'm doubly thankful for your leadership and your vision on this, and we really, really appreciate your help.
I'm delighted to be helpful. It's not often a negative salary position is attractive, but I'm delighted to be of help in this process. Thank you.
Thank you again. By the way, you're speaking to a lot of negative salary people up here.
We're not negative people, but negative salary people.
Members, we are going to move slightly out of order. We lose the quorum at 12:30, so we're going to move to the Chief Financial Officer's report, or Chief Operating Officer's bond issuance resolution and contract approvals so that we can make sure we get those done.
Good morning. We're going to turn to tab 15 and the 2020 request for financing of our CPRIT bonds. We do have the bond resolution. I'll just highlight that our financing, we do ask for $300 million. It won't exceed $300 million. Right now, my estimate for our request in 2020 will be $231.3 million in GEO commercial paper notes, which will cover the agency's operations as well as payments for grants ranging from 2013 through our 2020 awards. One thing I'd like to note is that there is a program description that will be modified given, because there was a paragraph in there that kind of describes what appropriations we have, but that was as of the time we had to prepare these documents. So by the time these documents go to the Public Finance Authority Board and then on to Bond Review Board, we will have a budget. So I just want to note that that paragraph will be updated to accommodate those decisions on our budget. If there are any questions, otherwise that concludes my remarks.
Members, let's see. 21. Thank you. No, I think it's 20, isn't it? No, it's 21. I'm still the chair. Watch out. Are there any questions for Ms. McConnell? Members, is there a motion to approve the resolution for request for financing Texas Public Finance Authority to issue debt on behalf of CPRIT in fiscal year 2020?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Moving to the next item, Ms. McConnell, the recommended contract approvals, please.
Yes, under tab 16, we have 3 service contracts that we need your consideration. The first is a contract amendment with Icon Clinical Research, which would increase the contract to $269,675 from about $212,000 to accommodate all of the Texas company, relocation company, and seed applications recommended for the business due diligence evaluations by a product development peer review in the second cycle of 2019. The second contract for consideration is the FY 2020 renewal with SRA International, a CSRA company, for grant management support services in the amount of about $7.9 million. I'd like to highlight that this covers only one grant application receipt and review cycle, given what we knew about the 2020 and 21 state budget when I was preparing these documents. If our budget has an increase in 2020 that will allow us to do a second cycle, we will bring back, we will get pricing from SRA and bring a contract amendment back to you in August to increase this. The third contract is an authorization for CPRIT staff to negotiate a contract for food and beverage banquet services for a not-to-exceed amount of $150,000 with the Austin Convention Center Catering as the preferred provider at the Austin Convention Center where the 2020 conference will be held. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these contracts.
Any questions on those three contract items? Members, is there a motion to approve the contract amendments with ICON, the contract renewal with GDIT, and the contract with Austin Convention Center Catering?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. McConnell. Now, I think we need to go to the other reports, right? Okay. Let's move to the internal audit report. Item 15, pardon me. And for convenience, tab 12.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Dan Graves from Weaver. I know it says Elisa Martin likely in the presentation materials. She had a conflict, so you get the less attractive, more broken member of our internal audit team today.
It's not a job-related injury, is it?
No, it's not, no. 12-year-old sports is not for older people, so I'll leave it at that. I will keep this brief. We don't have a lot, and I know we're on a time constraint for the quorum. I'd like to start on page 1211 because that's our summary report. So if you could turn to that. This is our summary report as of April 30. The first three items in that report are items that we previously presented to the Oversight Committee, and so those were completed as of our last presentation. The new item and the change on our report is the first item on page 1212, and that is the post-award grant management follow-up. We have completed the procedures and issued the report. That is page 12.1 of your packet. The summary of the results of our procedures is page 12.4 of that report, which we had one finding to follow up on. We completed our follow-up procedures and show that finding that we previously identified in other audits is remediated, so that is closed. We've reflected that on the summary in our table on page 1213, although I think in your packet that didn't get, the transfer into your packet didn't happen really well, and so speaking with Heidi before this presentation, she said that they would send you an update of that page. We also, as part of our activities, started follow-up procedures on the next audit, the procurement and P-card follow-up. We are into those procedures, but because there was a change in the initiation of the transaction cycle for that one finding within the state systems, we stopped procedures and will finish and complete those procedures in June when we perform our follow-ups on information security and communications. So with that, that's the summary of our planned remarks. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Members, any questions? We don't need to accept or anything, do we? There's no action.
Is there an action? I think
There's action.
I think there's an
Sorry.
action to accept the follow-up report for post-award
Thank
grant
you.
monitoring.
Is there a motion to approve the internal audit follow-up procedures reporting on post-award grant contracting and monitoring?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck. Stay out
I'm on the
soccer
downhill
field.
side. I should be absent all of this next time I see you. So.
So, yeah, so, right. Members, now we'll go to the other guests. Thank you very much for your patience. University Advisory Committee on Childhood Cancer and University Advisory Committee Annual Report. So I think we'll start with the University Advisory Committee Annual Report. Dr. Wilson.
Yes, as the committee, I think, appreciates the research program convenes 3 advisory committees that are very important to our consideration of the RFAs that are provided, as well as the opportunity to assess the effectiveness of those RFAs. In addition, it's an opportunity for the program to communicate with the larger Texas research community. And you heard last quarter from the Childhood Advisory Committee, and very appreciative of Dr. Michelle Barton, who is professor at MD Anderson and dean of the graduate school of MD Anderson and UT Health Houston, who is the chair of our University Advisory Committee, to present their report.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So thank you for allowing me to present our University Advisory Committee report. As you can see here, I chair the University Advisory Report. I'm at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and my vice chair is Kent Osborne. He's the director of the Cancer Center at Baylor College of Medicine. I thought I would briefly review again who we are. We represent all of the public and private institutions of Texas who have received CPRIT funds of any substance. For example, Rice University, Baylor College of Medicine, University of Houston, all in Houston. Thanks to CPRIT, there is now substantial cancer research both at University of Houston and Rice University. Baylor College of Medicine, thanks to CPRIT funding, is now a comprehensive cancer institute. So that's a great achievement. We have the entire UT system represented on our advisory committee, and the Texas state system. Texas A&M is represented, as is Texas Tech. And so we've recently added Southern Methodist and University of North Texas to our advisory committee. And I'll say our advisory committee has very lively discussions, and it's really a pleasure to make recommendations on where we see cancer research going and where we think it should go in Texas. Just to give you some background, our mission is very clear. We advise you on the role of higher education in cancer research. And in doing so, our focus is really to answer these questions. How has CPRIT impacted cancer research across Texas? What are the most effective mechanisms of CPRIT funding? And what priorities support a sustained impact of CPRIT in Texas? And so we also want to assure that cancer research continues to thrive in Texas. And we're very happy to hear the recent news that maybe there's some ray of hope there coming our way. I don't need to dwell on this. This is what the Oversight research funding priorities that the Oversight Committee approved in FY19. I just wanted to point out, for example, the newest one, which is the hepatocellular, focused on hepatocellular cancer and obesity-linked cancers. We continue to think that this is very important, as are the other priorities that I'll mention later, because of the health disparities and the prevalence of liver cancer and obesity-related diseases along the Rio Grande Valley that are ever increasing, unlike other cancers across the country. And you may recall last year that we had very strong, or perhaps it was me, had very strong recommendations about improving the CPRIT website and highlighting in a better fashion how CPRIT investment has impacted our state's underserved population and what measures will be taken to increase this impact. And I was absolutely thrilled to see the announcement of the new website, and this annual report is absolutely beautiful. Congratulations to Dr. Garcia and Wayne Roberts on this. This is really, really a beautiful product, and you just did an absolutely fantastic job, which is why I'm stealing a lot of your diagrams to make my point on what our advisory committee really would like to emphasize. And I think what was important in this annual report is to show the follow-up funding that has come to the state of Texas thanks to CPRIT money. We've been able to get NIH funds, increased NCI funds, and increased the number of comprehensive cancer institutes, not only at Baylor, but at UT Southwestern. So we've tripled the number of comprehensive cancer centers because formerly there was only MD Anderson. And of course, one of our highest priorities is to bring more research scholars into Texas through our recruitment awards. And the annual report says we've recruited 159 cancer researchers and their labs. More importantly, we created a lot of jobs here in Texas, and their labs are often Texas educated and Texas citizens that they've hired once they get here. And you can't see enough pictures of Jim Allison around MD Anderson. We'll be milking this for many years to come at MD Anderson. I'll tell you that even in the graduate school, we saw a 26% increase in applications this year at MD Anderson's graduate school. So thanks for that Nobel bump. And then, of course, the core facilities benefit all of us. We can't afford these expensive instruments, and so we've learned to share, and we share very well through the core facilities that are funded by CPRIT funds. And importantly, 108 new clinical studies have been initiated thanks to CPRIT funds. And you'll be hearing a lot more of this and how we want to take this across the state from Kent Osborne in his next presentation. And then the pediatric cancers, you can't argue with that. Let's save the children. 132 children and adolescent cancer projects have been supported. And that was really startling, that map of Texas where every county has been serviced by prevention. That's just really dramatic. And here is the usual table that you might see in typical format. It's a little harder to read, I apologize for that. But you can see that these are what the University Advisory Committee would like to continue to prioritize: recruiting scholars, the core facility support, the shared instrumentation grants, and the individual investigator research awards all across the spectrum of cancer research. Dr. Wilson worked very hard going and talking to tech transfer officers and strategic products development officers in various institutions to improve the early translational research awards. We heard at the product development committee that we're not even close to the chasm that gets us across to product development. But this is taking academic researchers that have a lead product, and this time around, they were asked to partner with tech transfer offices, so maybe we can see the beginning of that chasm that we call the valley of death between research and product development. And then the high impact, high risk awards. These are really democratizing cancer research across Texas. We find that researchers at our smaller institutions, they can put in some really innovative grants, and with funding, they can actually be successful at them, and then they've been able to bring cancer research where it's never been before. So our recommendations is continue prioritizing successes, continue the successful CPRIT recruitment program, bring the best of cancer research to Texas, continue to support the successes of the individual investigator awards and the core facility awards, support the next generation of cancer researchers by funding research training awards. And I don't think this gets highlighted enough, but maybe that's because I'm a dean of a graduate school. But this is our new hope. This is our next generation, and we need to train them and inspire them to go into cancer research. Support emerging cancer research across Texas through these mechanisms and the High Impact, High Research Awards. And finally, we feel that the Multi-Investigator Research Awards have not been all that successful and haven't had the best payoff, so maybe decrease the emphasis on that. We don't usually make recommendations like that, but you know, to be honest, they really have not had the big payoff that we had hoped for. So I think more outward looking, I'm almost done, I'm sorry. Continued support of efforts to fight liver cancer across Texas, especially in the Rio Grande Valley. Bring access to cutting edge cancer clinical trials for residents across all of Texas, and Kent Osborne will go into that much more detail. And of course, we've already told you about increasing the number of comprehensive cancer institutes across Texas. So we've lived through several funding models of CPRIT and the University Advisory Committee. We've seen what could be described as the fiscal cliff model. Then it gently morphed into the sunset model. And now we actually have a ray of hope. And we're really thrilled with that. And so we think real momentum, measurable results, and we can continue to expedite innovation in cancer prevention and maybe find cures. Let's hope so. Thank you.
Dr. Barton, I don't know if the other members have any questions, but they're so eager that I'm going to ask mine first. You mentioned that the multi-investigator awards have not had the big payoff. Can you tell us, first of all, what is, I'm interested in how you measure success in the academic arena, and do you have an idea of why the multi-investigator awards, at least in your view, have not been as successful? And in the process, can you tell us what is success in that arena? We spent a lot of money, we got a lot of papers published.
Well, that's the general measure of success in the academic arena, is how many papers you published. But also, I think has real impact here, I would say, would be follow-on grants. Have they renewed those multi-investigator awards? Have they completed the work that they said they would complete in that amount of time, and then taken it to the next level to renew the multi-investigator awards? How often have they been renewed? That should be looked at. The last round of multi-investigator awards, there was we hoped to improve the impact of them by asking them to show evidence of team science before they applied for the grant. So are they working together already? Are they publishing together already? Do they already have interactions that additional money will take them to the next level? And that's what we really need to emphasize. If we're going to continue the multi-investigator awards, we need to actually fund teams that are working together well and making discoveries. Perhaps then they'll be ready to go to the product development committee someday. That's my opinion.
Dr. Rice.
2 questions, please. Thank you so much for your work, Dr. Barton. We really appreciate it. That number 3, support for next generation cancer researchers with research training awards. Does that mean something like funding postdocs? What does that mean exactly? I've forgotten.
So CPRIT already does fund training grant awards. I forget the number across.
About 22.
There's about 22 of them across the state. And they fund graduate students and postdocs. And each year, maybe about a maximum of 10 graduate students and postdocs will be appointed, depending on the size of the award, the amount of money they have left. They've also, and I think this is very important, they've also been able to fund summer research programs. And so this really brings undergraduate researchers from all across the country, and they apply for these CPRIT training grant positions for summer research. And this could be their first exposure to cancer research. And they can see, you know, often there's an emphasis on diversity as well. And they can see people who look like them being successful in cancer research, and they know they can do it. So that's why I think we should continue funding those.
Second question was on the multi-investigator. the model of DARPA, a federal agency, is this collaboration driving innovation, was kind of where at least I came from when I thought about multi-investigator collaboration, the theory that collaboration will drive new kinds of thinking or new kinds of discoveries, whatever. How would you speak to that? Does the multi-investigator award effectively do that, or is collaboration something that we need that drives innovation, or how do you think about the idea that collaboration might drive innovation, and how do you apply that in the real world?
I think perhaps the second round of multi-investigator awards that were funded may have emphasized that a little bit better. How do you promote collaboration among teams and in order to gain innovation? That's a great question. Maybe one thing, I hate to ask CPRIT to do more compliance, but one thing perhaps is in their annual progress reports for the multi-investigator grants, maybe ask them to state, how often did they get together and meet? What do they see as outcomes for that year, and where is the innovation? Have categories for innovation as well as reporting on publications and follow-along funding.
I mean, it's not intended to be a discussion necessarily in this forum, but,
Yeah.
You might also tell us that that's not really an effective thing to try to do with grants is to try to drive some kind of collaboration. People will do that organically as they study things. Are we thinking about it the right way?
Yes, I think the people that, I think in the first iteration, it was thought, well, the more Texas institutions we get involved in these multi-investigator awards, the more CPRIT's going to love us, and because we're bringing together investigators across the state. But it was a bit artificial because those investigators were not already collaborating, or for the most part. And they were asking for no-cost extensions in order to finish what they had promised to do. If you fund teams that are already collaborating, maybe bringing in one or two new people for more innovation, more fresh air, then I think you have your core of collaborators that have been working together for a number of years and shown productivity. I think that would be a safer bet for your investment. But again, these are my opinions.
Dr. Rosenfeld, did you have a question?
Just one quick question. On your slide where you showed the breakdown of how much money goes to each of the categories, as we're at the 10th anniversary of CPRIT, do you think those breakdowns within the grant category are appropriate, or should more money go to established investigators or rising stars and less to something else? Or do you think it's just absolutely perfect the way it is?
Well, this would, again, be, in my opinion, I think you have a good proportion. I think the investment in the new investigators allow us to bring fresh blood into all of our institutions. Perhaps the least effective has been maybe the mid-career rising star category. I don't know, Dr. Wilson, have you found that to be true?
Well, it turns out that the rising star is the most difficult to recruit.
That's what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think they get retention packages to stay back. But, and then to bring in the senior stars, obviously that has impact in more ways than we can count monetarily.
So you think there should be more emphasis on the, whatever the Established Investigator Award is called? What is that, Jim?
The senior.
Well, it is the Established Investigator. So I think what I heard Shelley say is that the proportion feels right, but the proportion is balanced by the fact that the first-time tenure-track faculty, which is certainly the majority of the 175, is an investment of $2 million. The established investigator is really a very, very high bar of senior investigator that is now about 25 to, I guess, or so of those 175. And again, that's a very special recruitment. It also invests $6 million, so it, I think, I heard that the committee felt that this is the right proportion. And what I would also add is that the Scientific Review Council, it's interesting that across all three of those domains have a similar success rate of about 50%, so that it seems that the kinds of the quality and the thought put into these nominations is similar across all three categories.
Dr. Barton, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it, and for the work that you all have put in, the entire committee has put in. Thank you. Members, I'm going to take up three items that we have to do quite quickly. Dr. Wilson, Dr. Osborne, if you could just hold on here. These are things we must get done. And I know that in anticipation of the next presentation, everyone will be here right at the moment. Members, we have 3 action items to take up before we lose our quorum. In the interest of time, and because I know that you have all reviewed the memos for these items several times, I'm going to go quickly through the following items. First, we have 5 appointments to the Scientific and Prevention Program Committees. Is there a motion to approve Mr. Roberts' 5 appointments as peer reviewers?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have an appointment, the motion carries. Next, we have appointments of Dr. Theodore Lech to the Advisory Committee on Childhood Cancer. Is there a motion to approve Dr. Lech's appointment?
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Finally, we have proposed changes to CPRIT's administrative rules. Is there a motion to approve the final order adopting rule changes to the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 703, and to approve the publication of proposed changes to Chapter 703 in the Texas Register?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, Mr. Roberts, Ms. Eckel, you got things passed without
Successful model.
having to do anything at all. Members, I want to remind you that we must elect a new slate of officers at our August meeting, so if you all would be thinking of the post of vice chair, which Mayor Margot currently holds, will be open, and we will need, Mr. Margot, I think, will be the next chair. However, we need to think about the offices of vice chair and secretary. Is that right? Okay. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Wilson, I believe, could you introduce Dr. Osborne, our next guest?
Yes, just as a introduction to this topic, as we, as a program, look forward to the next reauthorization of CPRIT and opportunities in front of us, we thought it would be important to take a careful look at how we at CPRIT are translating the discoveries that are being made to impact on patients. And I think, as all of you appreciate, one of the major vehicles for that is through clinical trial enrollment. And so we ask Kent Osborne, who, as has already been introduced, as the co-chair of our University Advisory Committee, to convene a new committee to advise on opportunities in front of us to take advantage of the discoveries that are being made, hopefully to have a greater impact on our Texas population. And no one's really in a better position to advise on this topic than Dr. Osborne. As you already recognize, he's the director of the Baylor College of Medicine's NCI-designated Comprehensive Cancer Center, but he also has led for the past 25 years the Special Program of Research Excellence in Breast Cancer at Baylor, which is all about translating discovery into innovative clinical trials. And so, Kent, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you for having me. I wanted to start just by thanking and congratulating the CPRIT leadership, Wayne and others, and our champions in the Texas legislature for what looks like is going to be CPRIT 2, which I think will be very exciting. I think it's important to point out to the Oversight Committee that when CPRIT was created, the federal funding of research was declining, and it declined a total of 20% if you consider inflation over that period of time. After the NIH budget was doubled back in 2001, it continued to decline. And even today, even though there's been additional funding of the NCI budget over the past 3 years now, still the cutoff for pay line for grants is at the 8th percentile. And so you can see that state funding of research is also very important, given the stress on the federal budget and so forth. So I want to thank everyone involved with CPRIT for their help in helping to establish Texas as a center of cancer research. So as was mentioned, I was asked to chair the Clinical Trials Advisory Committee, and this will be my report. The membership includes myself and Ruben Mesa, who's the director of the Cancer Center in San Antonio, Carlos Arteaga, the head of the Cancer Center at UT Southwestern, Stephen Eck from representing industry, Gail Eckert, the head of the Livestrong Cancer Institute here in Austin, David Hong, head of experimental therapeutics at MD Anderson, Pat Reynolds at Texas Tech, and Ray Tabi-Bizarre from another industry representative. We've had 3 meetings, one in May of last year, where we reviewed our charge and reviewed the current CPRIT investments in clinical trial research. And in September, we reviewed potential solutions and principles that CPRIT might consider. And in January of this year, we discussed specific proposals to recommend, and that's what I'll be talking about now. So what's the problem? Well, the problem starts with this: targeted therapy for cancer, sometimes called precision medicine. As you know, cancer is caused by mutations in normal genes, which alter their functions in the cell to cause the cancer. Many genes, if broken or mutated, can cause cancer, hundreds of the 20,000 genes in a cell. The particular set of mutations in a person's tumor drives the cancer to grow and spread. No 2 cancers are exactly like genomically. Even 2 breast cancers, they're totally different genomically. There's no 2 that are identical. It's like your fingerprint. Blocking the function of these mutant genes is a new treatment strategy that everybody's embracing now. The trick is to determine which genes or pathways are malfunctioning and then pick a specific drug to block those pathways. This requires many new drugs that target the function of these mutant genes. So what are the problems with implementing precision cancer medicine? They're summarized here. First is matching the drug with a defective gene pathway. You got to have a whole bunch of drugs to match with the defective pathway in that particular cancer. There's many potential mutations. They require many new drugs. And there's hundreds of new drugs in the pipeline coming out of industry. Only 5% of all cancer patients go on clinical trials nationally. That is a real problem. And there's many reasons for that, and we're going to try and address that in one of the recommendations that we have. There's not enough patients to rapidly evaluate all these exciting new drugs. Access to clinical trials is limited mostly to academic centers in larger metropolitan areas like Baylor, MD Anderson, UT Southwestern, et cetera. The lack of access by patients in rural or underserved areas is a problem. So here are some of the principles that our committee reviewed and proposed. One is to increase access to clinical trials for patients in outlying areas or the underserved population of our state. This would be through a competitive RFA process. Early phase trials that can be completed quickly would be emphasized. Investigator-initiated trials derived from work in a Texas laboratory would also be emphasized. We would focus on efficiency and speed, which is very difficult in clinical trial research. It seems like it takes forever to activate a clinical trial. We have to partner with industry, and we would provide personnel and infrastructure to smaller hospitals outside of the academic centers to accomplish our goal. We would leverage the infrastructure in the major cancer centers, such as each cancer center has a clinical trial support unit and has core facilities. There's no reason to invent a big central laboratory or a central facility like we tried to do back in the early days of CPRIT. Take advantage of what we already have. We might want to consider funding for tumor and blood biopsies for the genomics to study the patient selection and do the research. Emphasize multi-institutional trials and collaborative studies. So here are some of the solutions that our committee came up with. One is to increase the number of patients available for clinical trials, expand access to rural or underserved areas, provide clinical trial infrastructure and staff in these outlying hospitals and clinics to allow them to do clinical trial research, form a network to extend the expertise in academic centers to these outlying areas, train more doctors with expertise in clinical trials, and give them the time to do the clinical trial research in the first place. So more doctors, more patients to address all these drugs that are coming out of the pipeline. Here's the first proposal of the two that I'll describe. This one is to increase access to clinical trials and increase the number of patients available for clinical trials. And that is to create a clinical trial or a series of clinical trial networks. There would be a hub and spoke model with major research institution being the lead institution, partnering with outlying and or underserved hospitals, which would be the network hospitals in my definition. We would provide resources to the lead institution to administer and coordinate a network, but then most of the resources would go to the network hospitals to create a functioning clinical trials infrastructure. Clinical trial work is very expensive, and you have to have a lot of personnel to do it correctly. These smaller hospitals out in the rural areas don't have the money or the resources to do it. Here's the idea schematically. You would have a lead institution, maybe a cancer center that already has a lot of expertise. They would partner with a series of network hospitals that are big enough to do clinical trial research if you provide them with resources. And they would, of course, then get patients from these very small hospitals out in the more rural areas or underserved areas that don't and could never do clinical trial research. They're just not large enough and don't have enough patients to do it. So in doing this with a series of lead institutions and a series of networks, you could increase and expand the catchment area quite substantially in the state. What would be the resources that would be needed? First, for the network hospitals, they need a research pharmacy, a research nurse, study and regulatory coordinators, IRB fees for a central IRB to speed the activation of trials. They need a clinical trials monitoring system. The one that we use is called Encore. It's a computerized web-based system that allows you to enter patients on the trial and keep track of them. Equipment for storing tumor samples and blood samples, video conferencing capability for tumor boards, funding for tissue biopsies for research. Almost all research now involves clinical correlations with the tumor itself. You need to biopsy the tumor, pick the drug, and then do the trial. Support, perhaps salary support for a physician champion at the network hospitals. A lot of people aren't experienced, they're not trained, they don't have any interest in doing clinical trials. If we provided some partial salary support for a champion at each one of the network hospitals, that would encourage them in that hospital to get involved with clinical trial research. Then finally, funding for training of the personnel and site visits to these network hospitals for quality assurance, quality control, and other things, other metrics that are very important when you do clinical trial research. There would be a few resources needed for the lead institution. There's incremental cost for oversight and monitoring, a site coordinator, an administrator for communications, billing, and to track accrual, travel expenses, and video conferencing. What are the metrics of success? The number of patients screened and accrual from remote areas in the state would be one. Satisfactory performance on QA, QC, and audits. We get audited by the FDA, by cooperative groups on our patients. They're going to have to do these smaller hospitals are going to have to do the same thing and pass those QC and quality control audits. Training and participation of the network hospitals with the lead institution clinical trial support unit. Ability to enroll patients with molecularly defined subsets. That is, when I first started 45 years ago, there was a new drug that came out, you'd treat all cancer patients with it and find out whether it worked or not. That's not the way it is anymore. Now it's specific for a specific pathway that's abnormal in a patient's tumor. And it's much more difficult to enroll these molecularly defined subsets. And then finally, there should be referral of patients from these outlying hospitals for more sophisticated study or treatment to the lead institution itself. Not everything can be done in these smaller hospitals. The future plan, after the initial networks would be defined, would be to create a statewide clinical trials network by combining in linking the lead institutions and their networks together for one big Texas cancer trials network that would allow us to do larger and more sophisticated trials in the state, trials of agents emanating from labs in Texas and industry. And this might be done through an administrative supplement to the lead institutions and network hospitals that were set up in the phase 1 of the program. The second proposal is to increase clinical trial physicians' expertise in that area. And physicians interested in clinical investigation is declining. The number is declining. The interested oncologists don't have the time. Today, now the hospitals and the medical schools are forcing doctors to generate their salary through work RVUs. Work RVUs is a bad thing in most academic centers because it doesn't give the clinician time to do the research. Oncologists will go into private practice where they have higher salaries rather than staying in an academic institution and take a lower salary but still have to work just as hard and generate the work RVUs. New oncologists lack the opportunity, interest, and proper training for clinical research. And this shortage will impair clinical trial and translational patient-oriented research going forward, given all the drugs that are needed. Potential solutions for CPRIT, CPRIT Clinical Investigator Award, and that is to provide training to oncologists early in their career and time to do clinical research. This might be in the first 4 years of a new faculty member at an institution. They would provide partial salary support to provide time for career development and to begin a clinical research career, maybe limiting their clinical time to, say, 0.4 or 0.5 FTE. It would support early career clinical researchers who have made a commitment to focus on patient-oriented research, and have a focused recruiting effort for CPRIT scholars interested in clinical investigation. That wouldn't be part of this proposal. It would just be part of the already existing recruitment, academic scholar recruitment. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Members, any questions for Dr. Osborne? Dr. Rosenfeld, the regular.
I try. Actually, thank you.
Don't forget the microphone and the button.
I pressed the button.
Try harder.
We need lunch. Thank you very much for your presentation. Had several questions. I may have heard this one wrong, but I think I heard you say that you would like to do early phase trials at outlying centers.
Yeah.
Does that mean you want to take the highest risk phase 1 studies and move them? Was that what you were saying?
No, I didn't mean phase 1 trials when I said early phase, which have to be done in an academic center.
Right, so
yeah.
that's what I did.
But phase 2 trials could be done in these other smaller hospitals once you know the side effects and toxicity and the dose that you get from the phase 1 trials. I should have defined that a little bit better. It's sort of, you can't do a phase 3 trial because you need thousands of patients today, but you could do phase 2 trials in most of these hospitals.
Thank you. Next question had to do with IRBs. It would be great if there was a Texas IRB, because as you know, going from IRB to IRB takes a tremendous amount of time, a tremendous amount of money. It's redundant, no end to the paperwork. If there had to be a priority, I heard from your talk, it would be to have one not Central Texas, but one cancer IRB for Texas would be a huge improvement in cancer care.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. And of course, the difficulty is getting all the institutions and their IRBs to agree to do a central. Now, they're doing that on a federal level now for some trials, and there is a central IRBs at the national level, but even that has been difficult to implement.
As you probably know, in other countries, there have been successful either regional IRBs, and that would be a major thing, and I think you get Texas right behind that. Someone needs to take the lead on that one.
Yes.
You mentioned referral patterns back to the mothership. As you know, referral patterns are a very complicated issue that have to do with lots of factors, and people may not want to send their folks to the mothership. They may want to send it to somebody's hospital where their friend is.
Sure. I think, first of all, this would be for the very complex bone marrow transplantation or CAR T-cell therapy, things that only certain centers even can do, even academic centers, only a few of them do them. So I think knowledge of what that center has to offer to the smaller hospitals, they may not even know that these things are available at certain of the lead institutions. That would help. And these are patients who could come from maybe one or two things, or a major surgery or a bone marrow transplant, not have to come repeatedly for 6 months for some treatment.
Another question has to do with redundancy to national cooperative groups. As you know, there's several large national cooperative groups who do just this. And is that recreating the huge bureaucracy it takes for the national groups that are already funded to do this? And also, is there a conflict with, say, if I'm at, say, Baylor, and I'm a part of, say, SWOG, I don't know if that's the situation, and I'm committed to put 500 people on SWOG studies, and now I put patients on the Texas Network study, is that going to raise a problem?
I don't think it's going to, because typically I was chair of the breast committee for SWOG for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years back in the 80s and 90s. And even today, they tend to do larger trials. That was the whole reason to set up cooperative groups, to do larger phase 2 and phase 3 trials predominantly. In fact, there's an intergroup now, as you know, to combine all the cooperative groups so they can do very large trials. Even internationally, trials are done now. So I think this is going to focus on, as I mentioned, the earlier phase 2 trials, smaller trials that you don't need a cooperative group to do. And I think there is a place for these. It's not going to compete very much with the cooperative groups. We're members of SWOG and NSABP at Baylor, and the trials that we have are not this kind of trial that I'm talking about here.
Thank you. And one of the questions is, do you think pharmas would want to participate in this? For instance, I have the latest, greatest new drug, and I want to trial it. And you say, well, I'm not going to do this at Baylor. I'm going to do this at some small town hospital 300 miles from here that you've never heard of, but yet you have to go out and monitor that site as a pharma company. And now you have a pharma company monitoring sites throughout, at very small sites with very low accruals. Would be a very inefficient operation.
Yeah, I think it would be attractive in one way to industry, in the sense that you've already got a cooperative group set up. They wouldn't have to set up their own and do all the wherewithal that takes to set up their own cooperative group for these phase 2 trials. And as I said, there's so many drugs coming out, they're going to be looking for these pre-existing networks or cooperative groups to do it, smaller cooperative groups to do these trials. I don't think that the patients are going to be, that they're going to be undergoing quality control and audits at the very smallest hospital that I had on my slide. I think it's going to be at the intermediate step that's going to attract those patients. And so I think those hospitals, medium-sized towns and medium-sized hospitals, will be okay for the pharmaceutical industry to monitor. They're not going to have to go out to the really tiny hospitals further out.
Dr. Rosenfeld, if you could take up the rest of this discussion with Dr. Osborne after we finish, we have other members who want to ask questions.
I'm done with my questions.
Perfect.
Dr. Osborne, thank you very much. I think that being a pediatric oncologist, I can tell you with reasonable surety that 100% of children diagnosed with cancer in the United States are treated as per COG Children's Oncology Group protocols. 98% are enrolled. We have a central IRB, and we're a national and international cooperative group. You have an organizational experience here in the Children's Oncology Group. I'm surprised that, for once, and I can say this reasonably well, the adult guys are somewhat slacking. But it's somewhat behind the ball game, I'd say, diplomatically, sir. But I must say, we do have an example where it's successful across multiple countries, and not only that, but in the most smallest of all towns in the world. and we're still getting phase 2 and 3 clinical trials done and keeping up with FDA regulations which are needed for quality control, etc. But my question is how will your program committee address the issue which is glaring, and that is the racial disparity or ethnic disparity that we have in enrollment of patients on clinical trials in Texas?
Yeah, I think that's one of the goals as well, is to increase our underserved patient population. At Baylor, for instance, we have a large Hispanic population, African American population through Harris Health. And we're sort of a model for including underserved populations in clinical trials. 40% of the patients on our clinical trials at Baylor, at our Duncan Cancer Center, are from minority, well, it's not even a minority in Houston, it's a majority, but it matches the population. 40% of Houston is Hispanic, 40% of the patients on our trial come from the underserved population in Houston. So it can be done, and I think this would be a goal, particularly in the Valley and other areas where there's a lot of underserved populations. This would allow us to expand to those areas and include greater numbers of minority patients on trials. It's really important to do, not just for the sake of the patients themselves, but when you have a new drug, you've got to know whether it behaves differently in a different racial or ethnic group. And it's very important to have such patients on your clinical trial to know whether the drug behaves differently in that population. So I think that would be a goal too, and I think that should be one of the metrics for approval of one of these grants, to how many underserved populations or minority populations are they likely to recruit to clinical trials.
Thank you.
I might
Yes,
say that
Dr. Cummings.
the Children's Oncology Group is a model, but children are different. 50% of all the kids with cancer in Texas go to Texas Children's Hospital and the Texas Children's Cancer Center. 90% in the region, Houston region, go there. So kids, it seems to be easier to refer children to large academic centers than it is for adults. And there's more adult oncologists as well, and they're scattered all over the place. And so they just don't refer patients with cancer, they take care of them themselves.
Maybe we've got little egos.
Dr. Osborne,
Dr.
thank
Cummings.
you.
No, you're not. That's right.
Dr. Osborne, thank you for your work in general. I've known of you and heard you speak on several occasions, and for your work on this advisory committee. Quickly, because some of us have to leave, what you're addressing is addressing me. I'm a medical oncologist in San Angelo, Texas, West Texas. We're 3 hours from anywhere, and I've often had conversations with our hospital administrators about how do we fix this problem. I'm completely intrigued with your ideas. I have thought at times that I was going to go buy a bus, you know, one that beeps when you back up, and put Dr. Cummings' clinical trial bus on the side and drive them to you in Houston, because a lot of the things that you've addressed are barriers, but the patient's unwillingness to travel is a huge problem. And not only that, but then you're dealing with underserved and rural areas where the culture is that you're going to stay at home. And I have my card and my phone number here for you because I'm going to have to step out. But this is a very exciting discussion for me because this is what I do every day.
Good.
And I appreciate your thoughts. And
I gave a talk
this
at
can
the
move
Texas
forward.
Society of Medical Oncology, I guess, in the middle of last year, and we had a little discussion about this. And the major problem for these smaller hospitals in doing clinical trials was, in fact, paying for the infrastructure to do them. And if I mentioned at that time, CPRIT was considering doing something like that, and they had the same response that you do. That would be welcome funding for that smaller hospital to do just what you're talking about. I'll take your business card. We're looking
Thank you,
for
Dr. Cummings. Dr. Rice.
Before I ask her, is it, are we at the right spot to continue?
Continue.
All right. I'll just ask a question which is probably leading and maybe something that we could pursue later. I'm interested in computational biology and the idea that there may be a role, and I'm just kind of asking and wanting to sort of get your sense of is there modeling to be done to try to accompany clinical trial work with sort of a vision maybe to the future even of how will clinical trials roll in the future, and maybe people will have characterizations of their genes and their epigenetic and their microenvironment, and that'll be a template to say, try step 1, step 2, step 3. And, is there a next generation of this that if we were to think about that and then wonder how we get there, that our current work would help us walk in that direction? It seems like we have an idea about what we would do, which is something that empowers sort of a traditional amplification of clinical trials, but I'm wondering if there's a future in 20 years when we look back, we'll be doing something pretty wholly different.
Sure. No, certainly big data, if you will, making data warehouses of all the patients going on trials, or even though cancer patients are not going on trials, and having that data available for analysis would be a major benefit. And there are several national programs. ASCO has one, AACR has one. Some of the companies that are doing genomic testing have them. I think it's being done, but one could imagine incorporating this. That would be the Encore clinical trials management system that I mentioned. Something like that could be transformed into a big database of Texas patients to amplify or augment what's being done nationally. This is obviously an expensive ordeal. It requires a lot of sophisticated and a lot of people to extract the data from the records. There are now techniques where you can get the data out of medical records into a database like that are happening. I think it's a very important idea to do that, and there are a number of ways to do it. Maybe it could be incorporated into this proposal as well.
Do you sort of see that as another slide in your deck potentially? I'm just wondering out loud because we're trying to envision, the 10-year vision here, maybe. And anyway,
we're having trouble doing that just at Baylor right now with all the hospitals that we already affiliate with in Houston. So it's not an easy process. There are, as I said, companies that are starting to do this at a national level, and maybe incorporating our data with one of them might be the way to go. For instance, if we're going to do a lot of genomic testing to select patients for the trial, there are some of these genomic companies that are doing just that. They're collecting clinical data, and they fund collecting the clinical data to put in this big data repository that's then available to the institution to mine and pool and analyze. And so that's one possibility to do something like this. So I think there's a number of possibilities. It's a little bit early to, I think, say how we would do it in this particular proposal, but I think it's coming.
Thank you.
Dr. Osborne, thank you very much. No further questions, I believe. We appreciate your work and the committee's work. Thank you. Members, I believe that concludes our business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
For the last Garcia meeting, we are adjourned.